This morning, I'm going to preach about how God's call to Abram and his wedded life partner, Sarai, plays out. I'm going to call them by the names God gives them later on, Abraham and Sarah. That's the name most of us know them by. God's call that we heard in the lectionary lesson for today is short, but as a whole, the call gets pretty complicated. First of all, there's the difficulty of being asked to leave friends and a home and go to an unnamed place, especially in exchange for a pretty vague covenant of promises. But I like the story because Abraham and Sarah had enough faith and moxie to just do it. The call is vague but so real, they get up and they go. And just before the verses Robin read so well, we learned that Abraham and Sarah are both direct descendants of Noah. But Abraham and Sarah, of course, are famous in their own right. And while we may think of them now as legends who are unlike us, we often feel flawed and unworthy in face of them. But Abraham and Sarah are also flawed by human standards, yet their worthiness to God is never in doubt. Moreover, while Abraham and Sarah have lots of doubts and make lots of mistakes, like I said, they still just do it. They answer God's call all along the way with their doubts and with their warts. You see, while they are 10 generations removed from Noah, most everyone back then would have had to come from Noah in Bible stories, since he and his family are said in those stories to be the sole reboot of humanity. And the distance in time makes the connection to Noah somewhat fleeting, so Abraham and Sarah are pretty much an ordinary Joe and Jane, living with their dad, following his commands at the time of the call. That is, until they listen to God and follow divine commands and prove that we ordinary Joes and Janes have extraordinary potential that can play out when we listen to God. Just doing it. Answering God's call provides blessings. And in Abraham and Sarah's case, there's no doubt God's promises and blessings come true. And since I've been preaching that length of time to learn about faith, I decided to try and summarize Abraham and Sarah's story. We tend to hear and remember bits and pieces which can be meaningful, but we miss some meaning from the arc of the story. And most of us may have a sense Sarah and Abraham were blessed and blessings and founded Judaism, but we rarely stand back and look at the large tapestry of their narrative. And that narrative seems to have origins going back 4,000 years or so. And if we think the story is old, Abraham is 75 and Sarah is 65 when the call first comes and they hear it. They're senior citizens throughout their story. And if there's no other takeaway, their ages suggest there is time enough left for all of us to do as God beckons. And maybe that's one point of the long in the toothiness of so many Bible hearers. Past our prime, we are still primed to be God's instrument, still able to be blessed and to be blessings. We still matter much and are loved by God. Well, in addition to long qualifying for golden Buckeye cards, Sarah and Abraham are also childless, which is seen as a curse and a flaw in their culture. So they have age and barrenness as marks against them for much of the story. And if those are not enough strikes against them, they're not natives to the land that God calls them to. God calls them to be alien refugees. Like some cultures today, aliens were looked down on and mistreated back then, and much of the Bible is told from the perspective of aliens oppressed by others, and it has rules against oppressing aliens. And this often surprises, but it shouldn't, given that Judaism begins with Abraham and Sarah being called by God to go and be aliens. And they do just that. The lesson begins with them in Haran, a city their dad Terah led them to with his brothers and a nephew named Lot. God's call that Robin read comes at Haran. That call results in Abraham, Sarah, and Lot going to and settling in Canaan. And after settling in Canaan, a famine strikes, and so they flee to Egypt. And as they flee, some strange, uncomfortable, violent, and very sexist things happen. On the way, Abraham tells Sarah that they need to say they are brother and sister. As I mentioned, they have the same father, Terah. Abraham insists on the disclosure because husbands were said to own their wives, and so he's worried that he might be killed to get Sarah. A husband can't sell his wife, but a brother could sell a sister. And when they get to Egypt, sure enough, Pharaoh wants Sarah for her beauty, so as planned, they claim to be brother and sister, and Pharaoh pays Abraham for Sarah. And right away, Pharaoh and his families are literally plagued. Pharaoh discovers this because he took Sarah for a wife when she was already married. Women could only have one husband. And to end the curse, Pharaoh exiles them both, which leads them back to Canaan. And they settle in the same area as Lot. And when they're there for a while and their flocks begin to outgrow the area, Lot moves to land near Sodom, and Abraham moves to the land on the plain of Mount Ray. And at one point, Sodom is plundered by a raiding army, and Lot is captured. Abraham rescues Lot, recovers the loot, and returns it to the grateful king of Sodom, who blesses Abraham. And shortly after that blessing, God comes to Abraham in a vision, reminding him of the promised land and blessings. And this time God identifies the land and promises many descendants and foretells the Hebrews' Egyptian enslavement that occurs centuries later. And after the dream, Sarah and Abraham wonder how God will provide descendants and seed the nation through them, since Sarah is past childbearing age. And so they decide to make it happen by having Abraham impregnate Sarah's slave Hagar, whose children are considered Sarah's, since Hagar is her property. And Hagar tragically has no say about any of this. And if that's not bad enough, when Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarah is jealous and mistreats her, and Hagar runs away to the wilderness, and God meets her there and tells her to go back to Sarah. God also tells Hagar she will have a boy, to name him Ishmael, and that she will have many offspring. And Hagar names God out there, names God Elroy, which means he sees me. God sees this alien female slave abused by God's chosen but flawed people. And the Bible makes it clear that Hagar matters much. She is honored in the story to hear God's covenant directly. She is honored to experience the first enunciation of a Bible in all of the Bible. And she is honored as the only person in the entire Bible to name God. Those oppressed by God's people are also seen by God, and they matter. And God signs toward their well-being. And after talking to God, Hagar returns, and we're told that Abraham is 86 when Ishmael is born. And when Ishmael enters into adolescence, Abraham is nearly 100. And at that time, God reveals to him that circumcision will be a sign of the covenant, and he reveals Sarah will have a son whom they're to name Isaac. The news that 90-year-old Sarah would have a child named Abraham literally fall down laughing. And after he got up and no laughing matter to many of us. He had all the males in the household over 8 years old circumcised. The next thing we know, Abraham is resting in the shade of his tent when 3 figures visit. Abraham provides them with hospitality. He generously welcomes them, washing their feet, and serves them a feast. And it turns out 2 of the visitors are angels, and one of them is God. And God tells Abraham that within a year, Sarah will have a son. And Sarah overhears this and laughs. And God asks why Sarah was laughing and adds, "Is anything too wonderful for God?" After the feast, Abraham walks with the visitors a short way toward their destination. And on the walk, he learns that Sodom and Gomorrah are at risk of destruction as a consequence of sinful behavior. The angels are going there to check it out. Abraham bargained with God to stop the destruction if at least 10 righteous men could be found there. And when the angels get to Sodom, they receive the exact opposite of the hospitality that Abraham had shown them. A mob of men sought to violently assault them in a terrible manner, not uncommon in that time and place, to dominate others into submission. Despite what we might hear, this attempted assault had nothing to do with any type of sexuality. It was a barbaric form of conquering. And Lot rescues the angels from that violence. The conduct is a sign that the city's people are wicked. And the prophet Ezekiel later details the wickedness was that Sodom, quote, had pride, excessive food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy, end quote. And then Jesus later suggests the sin of Sodom included being grossly inhospitable. And in the story, the sins have consequences. Sodom and Gomorrah go up in flames. Lot's family are allowed to survive if they leave and not look back. And if the angels and God's visit sounds odd, guess what happens next? Once again, Abraham openly claims Sarah is his sister to ward off being killed as the Philistine king has Sarah brought to court. But God warns the king in a dream that he and his family will die if he touches Sarah because she's married to Abraham. And the king asked Abraham why he did this to him. And Abraham gave the same reason he had in Egypt, that he would be killed for his wife, and he worried about it. The king gives Sarah back. He also gives Abraham riches and lets him settle anywhere that he wants in Philistine. And Abraham then successfully prays for the king and his family, and the ailments they have are cured. And then, except for some later water disputes which they work out, they all get along peacefully. And after that strange set of events, Sarah finally gives birth to a son, Isaac. And when Isaac is weaned, birthright conflicts regarding Ishmael, his half-brother, boiled over, and they're not worked out. And reportedly, God, under the old polytheistic name Elohim, okayed Sarah and Abraham cruelly and callously dumping Hagar and Ishmael in the desert with just a bag of water and some bread. Hagar and Ishmael then wander in the wilderness until the water is all gone. And as they prepare to die, an angel appeared. Water's provided. And the angel tells them that Ishmael will become a great nation, and Hagar and Ishmael survive. They survive to fulfill God's promise. And after that horrid conduct by Abraham and Sarah, their story begins to come to an end with one more strange, terrible story. God, again, under the old polytheistic name Elohim, commands Abraham to literally sacrifice his son Isaac. And so we're told that Abraham took Isaac to a mountain to make a burnt offering. And when Isaac asked his dad about the sacrificial animal, Abraham told him God will provide a lamb from the offering. And before there could be a sacrifice of Isaac, God tells Abraham, this time under the monotheistic name Yahweh, to not hurt Isaac. And sure enough, Yahweh provides a lamb for the offering. And this part of Abraham's story is often read to be about obedience to God regardless of the morality or the strangeness of the command. And I find that a terrible reading, not in line with Yahweh as a loving God. And I mentioned before that there's another way to hear it, to read it, to understand it. We can understand it as Abraham disrupting the ancient Near East polytheistic gods, calls for human sacrifices of sons in times of crisis, which we know was going on. Abraham alters this awful practice by listening to Yahweh, the monotheistic God of all, who desires the well-being of all, and ends the practice of human sacrifices for all the Hebrew nation. And interestingly, some scholars even suggest that circumcision is a part of the compromise that Abraham came up with, where only a part of the son is sacrificed. After Isaac and Abraham sacrifice the lamb, they come off the mountain and they go to Beersheba. And as the story closes, Sarah dies first, and she's buried in the cave of the patriarchs. Believe it or not, Abraham remarries and has 6 more children with his second wife, Keturah. And he lives long enough to see Isaac marry Rebekah and to see his grandchildren, Jacob and Esau. And Abraham is 175 when he dies, and his sons Ishmael and Isaac get together, and they bury him with Sarah. That's the end of the Sarah and Abraham narrative. And in that rather quick recounting, I've left off things with the big picture of Abraham and Sarah's narrative. In it, we can hear it's full of ups and downs, good and bad, questionable behavior by Abraham and Sarah, and even by God, imagined by humans in the story. And while the events are strange, the pattern of ups and downs and good and questionable behavior is not. That's the life pattern for most humans, for most of us. Not living in the context of Bible times, we may not understand all of the story, but we can learn from it. We discover the good news that ordinary people are God's chosen and called, and that God calls and sides with those any culture looks down and oppresses. And not only that, God does not give up on or uncall or unlove people who listen, even if they make mistakes, no matter how big. God soaks every nook and cranny of Abraham and Sarah's life. Indeed, God soaks the story itself, calling out to humans for 4,000 years to long for well-being. Like God in the story, as listeners, we side with the oppressed and the abused. Every badness, we want there to be goodness. For every goodness, we cheer. We want elderly Sarah and Abraham to be valued and honored and have well-being and even adventures in the autumn of their lives. We want Abraham to not be killed, and we want Sarah not to be taken into harems. We even want the kings and their families not to be plagued. We want Sarah and Abraham to have the children they long for and the land and other blessings from God. We want visitors to be treated with hospitality and violence and inhospitable conduct to stop, and that there be consequences for bad and good conduct and the chances for redemption and salvation. We want humans to be rescued from harm. We want well-being for all the people in this story. And we long for a God who wants that well-being too. And every step of the way, no matter who is causing harm in this story, God can be heard in one form or another to step in and re-aim humans who are willing to listen toward well-being. And that is shalom. That's peace. The overall arc of this narrative is that each person who listens and follows God's call is led toward their own well-being and the well-being of others. This is a story of a God who is there to lead every listening Joe and Jane to well-being, to shalom, to peace. And that's why this story has been around for 4,000 years. That's why it's foundational to three major world religions. That's why it matters still. See, it's a story that says humans are loved by an ever-present God and that we matter much to that God. Not only that, it's a story that teaches well-being of others ought to matter to us too. See the big picture. We can understand what this story is about.